For 42 years, one man ruled Libya with an iron grip. Muammar Gaddafi. Flamboyant and defiant, he styled himself Africa's King of Kings while presiding over a land of oil wealth and suppressed dissent. On the streets, he was hailed by supporters, but in the shadows, his opponents vanished or languished in prisons. 2011. The Arab Spring reached Libya, and decades of smoldering anger erupted. Protesters flooded the streets, demanding an end to Gaddafi's rule. The regime hit back with brutal force, pushing the country to the brink of a bloodbath. The world watched in shock until NATO intervened, vowing to protect Libyan civilians from their own government. NATO jets roared in the skies, raining fire on Gaddafi's forces, while rebel factions united on the ground. City after city broke free from the regime's grasp. In Tripoli, jubilant crowds tore down the green flags of the dictatorship. Years of fear seemed to crumble overnight. By late summer, liberation was at hand, or so it appeared. October 20th, 2011. Sirte, Gaddafi's final stronghold. As his convoy tried to flee, NATO airstrikes cut off any escape. Amid smoke and chaos, the once omnipotent ruler was found cowering in a drainpipe, bloodied and disoriented. A frenzied mob swarmed. In a blur of rage captured on a cell phone camera, Gaddafi was beaten and killed. The dictator was no more. At last, Libya's torment seemed over. Relieved citizens celebrated, believing a new dawn had arrived. But Gaddafi's death did not bring the peace or unity many had hoped for. In removing the tyrant, the war also tore away the fragile order he had imposed, leaving a yawning power vacuum. Rival militias and tribes soon turned on each other, and the hope of revolution gave way to a new nightmare of civil war. The shockwaves spread beyond Libya's borders. Weapons and fighters poured into neighboring countries, sparking unrest from the Sahara to the Sahel. One nation's collapse was shaking an entire continent. NATO's mission had been to save Libya's people. But did it instead condemn the nation? Was the price of Libya's liberation far greater than anyone imagined? How did a mission to protect civilians unleash such chaos? The journey to find answers begins in Chapter 1. It is September 1969. In the pale morning light, Libyans awaken to the rumble of tanks and the echo of an army marching on Tripoli. A 27-year-old army officer, Muammar Gaddafi, has seized the moment. With barely a shot fired, his band of free officers topples the aging King Idris in a bloodless coup, ending a monarch's reign that many saw as corrupt and stagnant. In the streets, crowds cheer the young Captain Gaddafi. He stands upright in his jeep, uniform crisp and eyes alight, the face of a new era. The radio crackles with the voice of the newly formed Revolutionary Command Council, announcing Libya's rebirth as a republic. Gaddafi declares his nation free and sovereign, proceeding in the path of freedom, unity, and social justice. To Libyans long mired in poverty and foreign influence, the words ignite hope. Here is a fiery young Arab nationalist, inspired by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, promising to throw off the last shackles of colonialism. He is a desert mystic with a rifle, part warrior, part prophet, casting himself as the Arab world's answer to Mao and Castro. Under the banner of his Al-Fateh revolution, Gaddafi vows to remake Libya and uplift its people. Almost overnight, Libya's vast oil wealth becomes the engine of Gaddafi's revolution. The desert land that was once one of the world's poorest kingdoms is suddenly rich with petroleum, and Gaddafi moves swiftly to assert national control. Foreign oil companies are forced to renegotiate or give way. In December 1971, He shocks London by nationalizing British Petroleum's assets in Libya, even withdrawing hundreds of millions from British banks in retaliation for political disputes. And by 1973, his government has taken a controlling interest in all foreign oil operations, wresting away the majority of Libya's black gold. Rivers of oil money flood into the state's coffers. Flush with petrodollars, Gaddafi embarks on grand projects to transform Libya. Desert highways and modern buildings rise from the sands. He touts free education and healthcare for all. Illiteracy plummets and living standards climb. In public, he is humble, stern-faced, often wearing simple military dress or traditional robes, cultivating the image of a selfless Bedouin revolutionary. He insists he holds power only in trust for the people. In truth, Gaddafi is crafting a system entirely his own. By the mid-1970s, Colonel Gaddafi reveals his ideological blueprint, the Green Book. Its pages outline his Third International Theory, a manifesto rejecting both capitalism and communism. He proclaims Libya a Jamahiriya, a state of the masses, where direct democracy replaces parliamentary government. In theory, power flows from ordinary citizens in local people's committees up to a general people's Congress that governs the country. Televised images show Libyans at congresses raising hands to vote on laws, as Gaddafi insists that political parties are obsolete and the people now rule themselves. It is a bold, idealistic experiment, Islamic socialism, infused with his own eccentric philosophy. Gaddafi portrays himself as the guide of the revolution, not its president. Yet behind the populist theater, real power concentrates in his hands. Dissent is not tolerated. By 1973, even as he urges Libyans to take charge through revolutionary committees, he is also tightening his grip. Security agents lurk in the shadows. In one chilling episode, students who dared protest for democratic freedoms in April 1976 are publicly hanged as examples, broadcast on state TV. The message is stark. In Gaddafi's Libya, unity and people power must march to his drumbeat or face deadly consequences. Triumphant at home, Gaddafi turns his gaze across the Arab world. He is a pan-Arab true believer. In the early 1970s, he pushes fervently for Arab unity, dreaming of merging Libya with its larger neighbors. In 1971, he joins Egypt's President Sadat and Syria's President Assad to announce a Federation of Arab Republics. The plan, approved overwhelmingly in symbolic referendums, would bind the three nations into one. For a moment, Gaddafi seems close to realizing the vision of a single Arab nation that his hero Nasser championed. But the unity proves elusive. Old rivalries and differing agendas soon unravel the federation, which exists only on paper. Gaddafi's impatience with gradual steps frustrates his partners. He even offers to resign his leadership of Libya if it would hasten a true union with Egypt, a dramatic gesture that Cairo ultimately spurns. By the late 1970s, the dream of Arab unity falters. Egypt makes peace with Israel, a move Gaddafi decries as betrayal. Scorned by Arab monarchs and moderates alike, the young firebrand finds himself isolated in the Middle East. His frustration mounts, and his rhetoric against Arab traitors and their Western backers grows ever more incendiary. So Gaddafi pivots to a new arena, Africa. If the Arab world will not heed his call, perhaps the mother continent will. In the 1980s and 90s, Muammar Gaddafi embraces Pan-Africanism with zeal. He bankrolls and arms liberation movements fighting white minority rule and colonialism across Africa, from the battlefields of southern Africa to rebel camps in West Africa. In apartheid-era South Africa, The imprisoned Nelson Mandela hears of Libyan support for the African National Congress. Years later, Mandela warmly calls Gaddafi "my brother leader" in gratitude. Gaddafi's Libya becomes a haven for anti-colonial revolutionaries, ANC fighters, Namibian SWAPO guerrillas, Ugandan dissidents, even Irish and Palestinian militants. To those oppressed by imperialism, Gaddafi positions himself as a benefactor and comrade in arms. Yet in Western capitals, these actions earn Gaddafi a far different reputation. The Reagan White House brands him the mad dog of the Middle East, a patron of international terrorism. Throughout the 1980s, Gaddafi's fiery anti-Western rhetoric and his support for militant groups make him a pariah. Washington and London accuse him of bloody deeds, the deadly 1986 bombing of a Berlin nightclub frequented by U.S. soldiers, and the 1988 downing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Whether acting out of defiance or vengeance, Gaddafi's Libya becomes synonymous with rogue behavior in Western eyes. The standoff reaches a fiery climax in April 1986. Following the Berlin disco attack, U.S. President Ronald Reagan unleashes Operation El Dorado Canyon, an airstrike on Libya's heart. American warplanes scream over Tripoli and Benghazi, raining bombs on Gaddafi's compound and military sites. The blasts shatter buildings and nearly kill the Libyan leader. In the aftermath, television cameras show Gaddafi touring the wreckage of his own home. Dust-covered but alive, defiantly raising a fist. His adopted baby daughter lies among the dead. The images fuel Gaddafi's narrative of himself as the steadfast survivor, standing up to Western aggression. For a long spell, Gaddafi remains a global outcast, boxed in by sanctions and isolated by diplomatic cold shoulders. But as the new millennium dawns, the colonel makes a surprising strategic shift. Tired of economic strangulation and acutely aware of what happened to Iraq's Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi seeks a way back into the world's good graces. In 2003, he offers a dramatic olive branch. Libya will abandon its secret weapons programs and renounce terrorism. The announcement stuns the world, but it's genuine. International inspectors verified the dismantling of nascent nuclear and chemical arms projects. The move opens the door for Libya's rehabilitation. Gaddafi, once the arch-villain, is suddenly courted by the same Western nations that demonized him. Diplomatic relations are restored. European leaders fly to Tripoli, signing lucrative oil and trade deals. Gaddafi himself emerges from isolation. In 2004, he travels to Brussels, his first trip to Europe in 15 years. The United States removes Libya from its list of terror sponsors in 2006, and one by one, the UN sanctions crumble away. After decades as a pariah, Gaddafi is now an ostensible partner. He is careful to project humility, addressing the UN General Assembly in 2009, draped in earthy brown robes, calling President Obama, "my son." Yet the eccentric flourishes remain. He insistently pitches his Bedouin tent on visits abroad and surrounds himself with his famed female bodyguard corps. World leaders may shake his hand, but many do so with thinly veiled unease. The ghosts of Lockerbie and Abu Nidal still linger, and Gaddafi's unpredictability keeps his new allies wary. Even as he mends fences with the West, Gaddafi intensifies efforts to build an independent power bloc in Africa, one that might one day rival the West's global influence. At African Union meetings, he is a driving force, passionately advocating for a United States of Africa. He urges African nations to unite under a single continental government with a common defense force and one currency. In speeches, Gaddafi unveils his most ambitious vision: an African gold-backed currency, often referred to as the gold dinar, that could replace the US dollar and euro in African trade. He wants Africa's vast natural wealth, from oil to minerals, to be sold in this new currency, freeing the continent from what he decries as the tyranny of the dollar. It is a direct challenge to the global financial order. Western economists and intelligence agencies take note, and not kindly. Such a plan, if realized, threatens to undermine the dominance of the dollar and euro in Africa. French officials, in particular, bristle at Gaddafi's push, recognizing it as a threat to the CFA franc zone that cements France's post-colonial influence. At the same time, Gaddafi moves to fortify Africa's economic autonomy in other ways. He pours Libya's oil riches into proposals for an African monetary fund and African central bank, to be headquartered in Libya and elsewhere on the continent. By 2010, he has reportedly committed 2/3 of the $42 billion startup capital needed for these African financial institutions, a staggering sum aimed at liberating Africa from World Bank and IMF dependency. In private conversations from Washington to Paris, one can imagine the discomfort. Gaddafi, once merely a bothersome strongman, is now leveraging his wealth to challenge the very structure of global finance. Gaddafi's African outreach isn't just economic. He wraps himself in Pan-African symbolism, championing projects to uplift the continent. Libya helps launch the first African satellite, freeing African communications from costly Western networks. Libyan-funded infrastructure, from mosques to universities, dots countries across the continent. At home, he welcomes migrant workers from sub-Saharan Africa, styling himself as a patron of Africans beyond Libya's borders. By 2009, the African Union elects him as its chairman. In a crowning moment of theater, a gathering of African traditional rulers anoints him with the title King of Kings. Gaddafi, draped in gold robes, absorbs the adulation. His dream of prestige and influence in Africa seems to be coming to fruition. But all this comes at a price. To Western powers, Gaddafi's newfound clout is deeply alarming. Here is a man once vilified as a sponsor of terror, now not only controlling Africa's largest proven oil reserves, but also daring to propose a new financial backbone for Africa outside Western control. By late 2010, Libya sits on an estimated $150 billion in reserves and investments worldwide, a tidy war chest that could fund Gaddafi's grand schemes and prop up allies. His government has nationalized oil and gas to ensure profits serve his regime's aims. He speaks of defending Africa's resources from Western looters. In Washington, London, and Paris, Gaddafi is still often seen as the same old unpredictable mad dog in new clothing, now potentially more dangerous because of his reach. At home in Libya, Gaddafi's rule, once revolutionary, has hardened into one-man dominance. 4 decades on, he is the longest ruling Arab leader, titled brother leader, but behaving more like an emperor. His face graces every corner of the country. His quirky pronouncements are law. Oil wealth has brought Libya prosperity on paper, with high GDP per capita, yet beneath the surface, discontent simmers. Many ordinary Libyans see youth unemployment rising and wonder where the billions really went. They whisper about the corruption of Gaddafi's inner circle, his sons living in palaces, stashing sports cars and millions abroad. Promises of the Green Book's direct democracy feel hollow. Libyans know that speaking too freely can mean prison or worse. Over the years, prisons have swallowed dissidents, and the infamous Abu Salim prison massacre of 1996, when over 1,000 inmates were killed in a single day, remains a dark, open secret. Fear coexists with frustration. By late 2010, tension hangs thick in the air. Libya is a tinderbox of youthful anger, tribal rivalries, and pent-up desire for change. Gaddafi, now in his late 60s, appears aloof and invincible on the surface, still delivering rambling 2-hour harangues on state TV. But he cannot ignore the winds of change blowing through the region. To the east, in Egypt, and west, in Tunisia, popular uprisings are erupting, the early flames of an Arab Spring that will soon engulf the region. In Libyan cities, people watch these events on satellite channels and dare to imagine the unthinkable. Muammar Gaddafi's own people are losing their fear. And beyond Libya's borders, the great powers are watching too, with keen interest. In halls of power from Paris to Washington, officials sense that Gaddafi's moment of reckoning may be near. He has made too many enemies over the years, and not just in the West. Even among Arab and African leaders, Gaddafi's maverick behavior and regional ambitions have sown distrust. 41 years of iron-fisted rule have built up a reservoir of resentment. Now, as protest and crackdowns begin to stir on Libya's streets, the world's cameras turn toward Tripoli. The old revolutionary who once promised liberty now faces a rebellion of his own people. Western governments, once cautiously reconciled with Gaddafi, begin openly condemning his looming crackdown and quietly calculating their next move. The stage is set. A storm is gathering over Libya, one that will explode with a fury and alter the fate of a continent. Chapter 1 ends with a nation on the brink. Muammar Gaddafi, the self-styled King of Kings, is about to face the gravest trial of his life. The world holds its breath as Libya stands at the crossroads of revolution and war. The echoes of Gaddafi's rise now about to meet the roar of his downfall. Late 2010, a wave of defiance sweeps North Africa and the Middle East. In Tunisia, a young street vendor's desperate act of protest, setting himself on fire, ignites a revolution that topples a 24-year dictatorship. Soon after, in neighboring Egypt, millions occupy Cairo's Tahrir Square, demanding an end to Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. After just 18 days of historic mass protests, Mubarak resigns on February 11, 2011. The Arab Spring has arrived, proving that entrenched autocrats can be overthrown by people's power. These astonishing uprisings reverberate across the Arab world. In Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi has held an iron grip on power for over 4 decades, the winds of change stoke long-suppressed hopes and fears. Colonel Gaddafi, watching his fellow strongmen fall, appears on state TV to denounce the Tunisian revolt. But for many Libyans, Tunisia and Egypt light a spark. If their neighbors can shake off tyranny, why not Libya? A spirit of rebellion begins to stir, quietly at first, under the gaze of a regime known for zero tolerance of dissent. For 41 years, Gaddafi's Libya has been a police state. Political parties are banned. A network of revolutionary committees enforces loyalty, snuffing out opposition. The regime is notorious for human rights abuses, none more horrific than the 1996 Abu Salim prison massacre, when over 1,000 prisoners were slaughtered in secret. Corruption infects everyday life, and unemployment, especially among youth, runs rampant. Tribal tensions simmer as well. Gaddafi has ruled by pitting tribes against each other, favoring his own and a few allies, while marginalizing others. Decades of repression, corruption, and grief have left Libyans angry and hungry for change. In mid-February 2011, that anger begins to erupt. It starts in the eastern city of Benghazi, long a hotbed of opposition to Gaddafi. On February 15th, Libyan security forces arrest Fathi Terbu, a lawyer representing the families of Abu Salim massacre victims. This was the final straw. Outraged relatives and activists gather outside Benghazi's internal security office, demanding Terbu's release. By nightfall, the crowd has swelled into the hundreds. They chant slogans of freedom, an extraordinary act of defiance in a country where open dissent is almost unheard of. Gaddafi's forces strike back with batons, tear gas, and live ammunition. In the melee, at least one protester is killed. The streets of Benghazi erupt in chaos as people refuse to be cowed, and the first martyr of Libya's uprising falls. The very next day, February 16th, protests spread. Crowds, up to 2,000 strong, march on government offices in Benghazi, tossing stones and Molotovs. Police respond with rubber bullets and water cannons. Unrest flashes in other cities too. In the eastern town of Al-Baida, protesters torch police stations. In Zentan, in the western mountains, demonstrators burn security buildings and set up protest camps. What began as a single spark in Benghazi is fast becoming a wildfire of revolt. Libyan activists, inspired by calls on social media, designate February 17, 2011, as a nationwide Day of Rage. It is the anniversary of a 2006 Benghazi protest where Gaddafi's forces had gunned down protesters, a poignant date. Defying ominous threats from the regime, people take to the streets in cities across Libya on February 17th. In Benghazi's courthouse square, crowds of ordinary citizens, men and women, young and old, rally openly against Gaddafi's rule for the first time in their lives. They chant, "Down with the tyrant," and wave the old tricolor flag of the pre-Gaddafi Libya. The barrier of fear has been broken. Today, the Libyans broke the barrier of fear. It is a new dawn, exults one opposition figure in exile. Gaddafi's regime fights back with brutal force. On the Day of Rage, security forces and shadowy loyalist militias open fire on unarmed demonstrators. In Benghazi alone, witnesses report police shooting down at least 6 protesters on February 17th. In Al-Baida, snipers from internal security pick off people from rooftops. Human Rights Watch tallies at least 24 killed across Libya on that one day. Over the next 72 hours, the death toll explodes as Gaddafi deploys live ammunition, heavy weapons, and even air power against his own people. Accounts emerge of mercenaries flown in from sub-Saharan Africa to bolster the crackdown. In the eastern cities, hospitals overflow with gunshot victims. Doctors in Benghazi and Al-Baida treat scores of critical injuries. By February 20th, hundreds lay dead. Human Rights Watch reports at least 223 killed in 5 days, one of the bloodiest revolts to convulse the Arab world, with Benghazi, the cradle of the uprising, suffering the heaviest casualties. Benghazi becomes a war zone. Protesters, enraged by the bloodshed, begin to fight back. Some units of the military defect rather than fire on their countrymen. In Benghazi, a local army unit known as the Thunderbolt Squad joins the uprising, bringing weapons to the people. Armed with rifles and captured army vehicles, the protesters turned rebels storm the dreaded Katiba military barracks. After fierce clashes, they overrun this symbol of the regime's power. On February 20th, Benghazi erupts in celebration. Libya's second-largest city has been liberated from Gaddafi's grip. Charred remains of regime buildings smolder as euphoric residents shout, "Freedom!" into the night sky. Meanwhile, in Tripoli, Gaddafi's stronghold, the unrest reaches a frightening crescendo. On February 20th and 21st, thousands of brave demonstrators in Tripoli venture out, only to be met with a merciless onslaught. Gunfire echoes through the capital as pro-Gaddafi forces shoot protesters on sight. Residents report corpses lying in the streets and death squads of black-clad mercenaries hunting down dissenters. The downtown People's Hall, a major government building, is torched by enraged crowds. In several astonishing episodes, members of Gaddafi's own military refuse to carry out his orders. 2 Air Force colonels defect, flying their fighter jets to Malta rather than bomb the city of Benghazi as instructed. Gaddafi's regime is beginning to crack around the edges, even as it brutally clings to the capital. As the uprising engulfs the country, Colonel Gaddafi and his family make their stance unmistakably clear. They will not go quietly. On February 21st, Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, appears on television warning of rivers of blood. "We will fight to the last man, to the last bullet," Saif threatens. The next day, February 22nd, Muammar Gaddafi himself delivers an infamous, rage-filled speech that will be remembered worldwide. Speaking from the ramparts of his Tripoli compound, the same site bombed by the US back in 1986, Gaddafi rails against the protesters. He denounces them as traitors, greasy rats, and pawns of foreign powers. Wildly gesticulating and wielding his green book, the dictator vows to crush the uprising and die as a martyr in Libya rather than flee. Gaddafi's furious pronouncement, soon dubbed the Zenga Zenga speech after his repeated use of the Arabic word for Ali, makes it chillingly clear that he is prepared to unleash unlimited violence. Despite claiming he hasn't ordered any yet, he calls on his supporters to take back the streets and cleanse Libya house by house. The message to the world is unmistakable. Gaddafi will burn down his country before conceding defeat. By now, an estimated 300 people have already been killed, and with these new threats, even more bloodshed looms on the horizon. Libya stands on the brink of all-out civil war. The international community watches in horror. Broadcasts of Libya's carnage and Gaddafi's tirades send shockwaves around the globe. Leaders from Washington to London to Cairo voice outrage at the regime's brutal response. US President Barack Obama, in a televised statement, condemns the violence as outrageous and unacceptable, demanding that the world speak with one voice to hold Gaddafi accountable. European and Arab capitals erupt in protests in solidarity with Libyans. The Arab League meets in emergency session in Cairo and suspends Libya's membership, denouncing the bloodshed. At the United Nations, diplomats stand one after another to urge action. The UN Security Council unanimously condemns the attacks on civilians and warns that those responsible will be held to account. Even some inside Gaddafi's own government defect. Libyan ambassadors at the UN and in various countries resign in disgust, and a number of top officials break with the regime. The world's outrage is growing into resolve. Foreign governments begin discussing what can be done to stop the killing. In Brussels, officials quietly float the idea of a no-fly zone to ground Gaddafi's warplanes. Neighboring Arab states join the chorus of alarm. Libya's turmoil has ceased to be an internal matter. It is now a crisis gripping the international community, with calls for intervention growing louder by the day. By late February 2011, Libya is at a turning point. The eastern half, Cyrenaica, is largely free from Gaddafi's control, while the west, including Tripoli, remains a lethal trap for protesters. The people's revolution has taken hold, but the regime's wrath is ferocious. In the eyes of the world, a humanitarian disaster is unfolding in real time. Something must be done. But what? As Chapter 2 draws to a close, the stage is set for a foreign intervention that will dramatically alter the course of the conflict. The fate of Libya, and the stability of an entire region hangs in the balance. The countdown to NATO's intervention has begun.